Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us on this special edition of Newsmakers. I'm Fred Martino. The death of George Floyd in Minneapolis has sparked protest across the globe. And after so many high-profile cases of police abuse, there is hope that this time will be different, that the horrifying video of Floyd's death will prompt change. Joining me to discuss that and much more is the president of the NAACP of Doña County, Dr. Bobbie Green. Bobbie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Fred. It's always a pleasure.
Well, Bobbie, as we start the program today, we are actually seeing images now from downtown Las Cruces and a vigil that was arranged by your organization to remember George Floyd. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about the local reaction to what is really becoming a worldwide movement for justice.
Well, Fred, NAACP organizations all over the country, including the members of the Doña County NAACP, understand that we simply cannot be expected to tolerate a pandemic, 3 killings of unarmed Black people in less than a month, and watch as police officers torture, taunt, and murder a man as he begs for his life. Collectively, the entire world knew that action was required. We cannot allow anyone, police officer or otherwise, to be so comfortable that they think they can put a knee on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds while the cameras are rolling. We just cannot allow the nonchalant torture and killing of human beings of any color as if it were business as usual. It cannot be business as usual.
Yeah, you know, it is encouraging to so many that we are seeing action all over the country and the world for that matter. I mean, protests in Germany, in Great Britain, and elsewhere. And at the state level, we're seeing action too. Last week, as you know, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham in New Mexico announced her intent to appoint a racial justice czar within the governor's office and also an advisory council for racial justice to monitor state institutions. What are your thoughts on that?
Governor Lujan Grisham has been an advocate for racial justice, and she has had the support of the NAACP statewide. We are pleased that she's appointing a racial justice czar. She recognizes, as many of our other elected officials. I've been contacted by Senator Udall, Senator Heinrich, Congresswoman Xochitl Torres-Small, and Mayor Miyagishima. They don't want New Mexico to be another Minneapolis. Nobody does. And although there was a killing of an unarmed man named Antonio Valenzuela, the police officer has been charged right here in Las Cruces. The message of our elected officials is clear. They recognize that racism is a public crisis, just as the pandemic is, particularly given the impact of COVID-19 on people of color. What's happening with the Navajo Nation is particularly disturbing, and Governor Lujan Grisham has made a wise decision. I do have one caveat, however. It will be important to identify the right community leaders to serve on this council.
Okay, and certainly we'll probably be following up on that as people are named to that council and as actions are taken. At George Floyd's memorial service last week, something that you and I both watched, the Reverend Al Sharpton said that he hopes that change can come from this movement, unlike so many times in the past where there was a lot of attention and then things just died down. Because the Reverend Sharpton said that his hope this time is because he's seeing so many diverse crowds all over the United States, as well as he talked about Germany and London and elsewhere. Do you agree?
It's given me a great deal of relief to see the diversity in the crowds, many carrying Black Lives Matter signs and calling for police reform. But my optimism is guarded because I don't want this movement to dissipate when the media attention is gone. I do agree with Reverend Sharpton, though, that this time feels different, but we have an obligation to make sure that it's different this time.
Yeah, and you know, I understand that in terms of being guarded about optimism, not only because of so many times in the past where there was a lot of attention and then things died down, but also because of what's happening also right now. I mean, certainly there's reason for hope, but other folks raise caution, especially when you do look at Minneapolis, where it actually took the state attorney general to file second-degree murder charges against former officer Derek Chauvin, that the initial charges by the local prosecutor was third-degree murder, not second-degree murder. That's just one example, and I want to get your thoughts on that because we have seen others of reason for some concern.
Well, history tells us that we cannot afford to let our guard down. After all, let's consider Breonna Taylor. She would have celebrated her 27th birthday on Saturday. She was gunned down in her home, in her own home, with a no-knock warrant after the police entered the wrong house. And no charges have been filed in that case even now. If we look at the stats and the conviction of police officers involved in fatal shootings, in comparison to the number of people killed by the police, particularly people of color, the number of actual convictions is minuscule. And so were it not for the fact that this murder was videotaped and the entire world saw it, there probably wouldn't be any charges in the case of George Floyd either. The bar for convicting a police officer for murder, very high.
I want to address some other things that have concerned some people. Many people alarmed by President Trump's actions. The Associated Press reports that military police used pepper balls and munitions to clear a peaceful crowd from an area near St. John's Church in Washington, D.C., and the president then stood there for what was described by the press as a photo op, holding up a Bible. What was your reaction to that?
Well, first, he was holding the Bible upside down. And second, Reverend Sharpton said that maybe you should open the Bible and take a look at Ecclesiastes 3. I agree with that. I'm amazed, actually, that the actions of this president seem to have little or no consequence. Did you know that in New Mexico, last week during our primary election, we had more than 143,500 and some odd people who voted for Trump? Quite frankly, that scares me.
Well, you know, continuing with actions and statements by the president actually, and I'm sure you've heard this, you've actually heard his voice saying this, he scolded local officials in their response to protests, telling them that they needed to, quote, dominate the protesters. That's the word he used. What was your reaction to that?
I thought, well, I typically think that his choice of words could use some improvement. He probably needs a speech writer and he needs to stay on script. I remember that he once told the police that they should rough them up a bit. as they put them in the police car. He constantly fans the flames of unrest. Let's not forget that the Cielo Vista Walmart mass murder killed 22,000 people. That shooter was an avid Trump supporter. And don't forget that in Charlottesville, where the 30-year-old woman, Heather Heyer, was killed, the president said there were very fine people on both sides. The vitriol and the mindset of his followers is a nightmare, frankly, for Black and brown people.
And, you know, Bobbie, you've noted this already. Others, of course, have noted this, and I'm sure we'll hear much more around the country talking about this, that, you know, we may not have even seen this day. We probably wouldn't have seen this day if bystanders had not been there to record the death of George Floyd. Some say that this points to a need for all law enforcement to be required to wear body cameras. The Congressional Black Caucus has introduced a bill that would require this nationwide in the United States, that every law enforcement officer would have to wear a body camera. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I thought we had already addressed the whole body cam issue, and I thought it was resolved that police officers should wear body cameras. I think it would be in their own best interest to protect themselves.
Well, a lot of departments do, but it's not universal. So, that raises a lot of concerns if you don't have video.
If you don't have video, it's all but impossible. And, you know, there's some that are calling to defund the police department, but I prefer our President Barack Obama's approach, a much more useful position where he urged every mayor in the country to review your use of force policies with members of the community and commit to report on planned reforms. And to our mayor's credit, he has reached out to me, and I'm planning to participate in a working session with Mayor Miyagishima and with Police Chief Gallagher. I've solicited input from local NAACP members, from the members of the Doña County branch, so that we can make a genuine attempt at local police reform. The recent killing of Antonio Valenzuela, an unarmed person of color, murdered during a traffic stop by a police officer who's no longer a police officer. But that shows that we have some work to do at home too.
Yeah. And of course, the Las Cruces Police Department announced, after making the announcement, that officer involved in that call was relieved of his duties. They also announced, as a number of other departments have, including Minneapolis, that they would no longer allow the use of neck restraint as a form of law enforcement. It's amazing, though, to some people that was ever allowed in the first place, that it took this for that to be addressed. You know, another thing that I have to ask you about that goes beyond very specific policies and goes more into really creating a different culture in law enforcement is the horrifying video that we saw after George Floyd's death at a protest where an elderly gentleman was pushed to the ground, and we see blood coming out of the back of his head, and the officers that pushed him to the ground walked by after he was injured. Again, a case where without video, we may never have known the full extent of that story, because the report indicated that he had tripped and fell and did not reflect what we saw on video.
I saw that video. I've seen several videos of police officers just seemingly unnecessarily violent towards protesters. they stepped over that man as if he were an empty Coke can or something. It was horrifying to see that. And this was not a person of color. This was a white man that they did that to. And so I heard from, I was watching another memorial in North Carolina, and the sheriff of Hope County said that not only do we need psychological evaluations, but that should be the first thing that we do when hiring police officers. The psychological profile of a police officer, I think there are some, tests that can be given to show a propensity for violence, a propensity to be a bully, and those police officers have no business protecting and serving, for sure. And then the other thing that I found so disturbing about that is not only did those two police officers were suspended, but the other 57 police officers resigned in support of the police officers that pushed that man down.
Yes, they resigned from that special unit. That's correct. I was going to ask you about that. They resigned, and some of them specifically noted in protest,
Right.
and then cheered them on after leaving a hearing. And this is just, when you look at that video, to think that occurred after essentially the truth was available. Everyone could see the truth, and then that was the reaction, is really unimaginable.
Absolutely unimaginable. And I would, if I had the power to do so, anyone that supported that action and condoned those two officers, as far as I'm concerned, they need to be fired as well.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to support something that is blatantly wrong, clearly wrong, and yet 57 of them supported that. That's very disturbing.
Well, we will certainly be talking much more about law enforcement issues on future programs, Bobbie. I want to move on now to something that you referenced earlier in the show, and that is the pandemic, which is hitting people of color hardest all around the country and here in New Mexico.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, there hasn't really been a response at the national level. The daily press conferences that the president used to have, which have now been stopped, mercifully they've been stopped, those appear to be nothing more than campaign rallies, rather than the dissemination of useful information during a pandemic. It's killed more than 110,000 people. Dr. Fauci has been a great source of information. And our own governor, Lujan Grisham, has been very proactive in trying to get control of this pandemic, but it's been a real challenge for people of color, particularly the indigenous people.
Yeah. And of course, more people of color not only have contracted COVID-19, but more have lost their jobs. And then that means, of course, lost for-profit health insurance. This is another major issue for many, many health conditions, and it's reminded us of some of the deficits of for-profit health care. I know that Joe Biden has included a public option in his proposed health care plan, something that President Obama also wanted but was not able to negotiate when the Affordable Care Act was passed. I want to talk about how the NAACP is trying to address this issue as we approach the November elections.
Well, the mission of the NAACP is, and it has always been, to ensure educational, social, economic, healthcare equality. This mission requires a push for the expansion of healthcare coverage for people of color, insured, uninsured, and underinsured, so that they have optimal health outcomes, access to timely and quality and affordable health care. African Americans continue to have the highest incident and mortality rates from stress-related hypertension, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity. Issues like HIV and AIDS continue to overwhelm the Black community. And what's happening to the Navajo Nation during this pandemic points to a deadly disparity in the health outcomes of people of color. All of this points to a need for massive reforms, and those reforms can only happen with a change in administration, to be honest with you.
And that brings us to another big concern that I know the NAACP is working on, and many groups are working on all around the country, and that deals with voting rights. Many states have not taken the necessary action to prepare for the November election during a pandemic. Some states, like Texas, in fact, are fighting efforts to allow people to request an absentee ballot for their concerns over COVID-19. We don't have that issue in New Mexico because you can request an absentee ballot for any reason, but you cannot in Texas and about 15 other states. What are your thoughts on this?
The National NAACP has filed a lawsuit, probably will file other lawsuits as part of a national strategy of our President and CEO, Derek Johnson, to fight voter suppression efforts nationwide, but also to do everything we can to save lives during a pandemic. We should not have to risk our lives to go out and vote. We don't want to see what happened in Wisconsin happen in any other state. African Americans and Latinos have been disproportionately suffering the brunt of the impact of COVID nationally. And so if they are forced to go and vote, that is probably going to be a form of suppression, and or it will jeopardize the voters' health. I'm very thankful for Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver. She gets it. Secretaries of States in other parts of the country are part of the problem rather than part of the solution. We would probably have 2 more African American governors right now in Georgia and in Florida if we had secretaries of state who were playing on a level playing field.
Part of the recent history in our country, I would be remiss if we didn't mention in this program that across the country we are also going to be marking Juneteenth. And I want to talk about the importance of this time and the need for a larger recognition in society of Juneteenth and in our classrooms as well.
Well, I can tell you that some of my fondest memories as a child, I remember going to Apodaca Park to celebrate Juneteenth. I remember the smell of some of the best barbecue that I've ever had. But it wasn't until I got older that I understood the significance of Juneteenth, because you certainly wouldn't get it from a textbook. It marks the date in 1865 that the slaves were notified, although the notification was 2 years late. The signing of the Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves. But, you know, Fred, the lynchings didn't stop with Juneteenth. And as far as I'm concerned, the lynchings haven't stopped yet. Anytime a man can be killed on camera with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the lynchings have not stopped. So in my book, Juneteenth is just as important as the 4th of July. Every citizen should know about it. Every citizen should have the opportunity to celebrate it. And we recognize that progress is slow. We've come a long way since 1865, but we've taken some steps backward as a result of a president who wants to make America great again. Every Black person in this country knows that what that dog whistle is all about.
Bobbie Green, she is the president of the NAACP of Doña County. A very good place for us to wrap up this conversation. I'm sure there will be many more, and we thank you for raising awareness and talking about these issues. We're going to be talking a lot more about them here and on KRWG Radio and krwg.org as well, where folks can read, as a matter of fact, one of your viewpoint columns at our website, krwg.org, talking about the issues surrounding the death of George Floyd. Bobbie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, and I want to thank KRWG for the wonderful public service that they provide to the community. Thank you so much.
We appreciate that. That is our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's morning edition from 5 to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG.org is also the place for local viewpoints and news. We're always there. We'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a good week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.